From the News Channel 5 Network, this is Morning Line with Nick Barris.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on Morning Line. Nick Barris here on a Thursday. And we've got a good show on tap for you today. I think something that all of us are aware of. You see it in the news on a daily basis. We have an issue in this city, as there are issues in cities across the country just like it, regarding juvenile crime, younger people getting into trouble, kids committing adult crimes. The prosecution and how you handle it, how you try to hopefully find ways to rehabilitate these kids so that they don't, just throw their lives away at a very early age. And it's a balancing act, isn't it? Protecting the public safety with, making sure that these kids have a chance to rehabilitate their lives. And it's not always easy to do. I know we've done programs before, and on my Facebook page when I post about armed carjackings involving maybe a 14 or 15-year-old, sometimes they remain incarcerated. Of course, we'll explain to you it's only a period of time they can be held anyway if they're that young. But sometimes within 24 to 48 hours after what may be perceived as a violent armed crime, they're back home with their folks or on the streets. And they've been picked up maybe a week later committing the same type of thing. And we're all scratching our heads, how the heck does this happen? There are reasons for these things occurring. It's not just frivolous. And we'll get into that and take some of your phone calls with someone on the front lines of this in prosecuting these youngsters when it comes and working things out as you deal with the juvenile court judge here, Sheila Calloway, in Davidson County. With us is Assistant District Attorney with the DA's office here in Davidson County, Khadija Babb. Nice to have you on.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I think it's great. I appreciate the DA's office sending you over and you being willing to come talk about all of this, because it's a big deal. And you're right. Explain, as an assistant district attorney.
Yes.
Okay, there are assistant DAs at all levels, right. A lot of them in adult court, but there are assistant DAs that work exclusively in the juvenile system. That's you, right?
That's correct. I work with General Stacy Miller. She's our team leader, team supervisor, and then Lindsay Moreland. She is she handles all of the transfer cases. So myself and General Miller, we do kind of the everyday, like detention cases. So when a kid is arrested, they're hearing this the next day. We handle those types of cases. And General Moreland handles all the transfer cases. So those are going to be the young people that are being transferred to adult court.
Yeah, to say a child that's been arrested for a homicide or a murder, correct. That's something that Judge Calloway would consider whether to transfer them.
That's correct.
But that's not what you deal. You'll deal with, say, shoplifting cases, right. Domestic cases where maybe there's an assault of some type. Correct. Would you also deal, as I mentioned, with the armed carjackings?
Yes. So if, depending on, we'll look at the history of the youth. If they come in with a charge like a carjacking, we'll look at the history of the youth and we'll determine if they should be transferred or not. And then if they're going to be transferred, General Moreland will handle the case from then on. And if they are not going to be transferred, if we're seeking supervised probation or even DCS custody, then myself or General Miller will handle those types of cases.
Okay. So, yeah, and there's so much to touch bases on. I know age of the child, priors, nature of the crime come into play. There is a perception among many in the public sometimes that some of these youngsters, are repeat offenders. They commit a crime that sounds pretty serious, maybe an armed carjacking or something like this, an assault of some type with a weapon. They go to juvie, they're arrested, they're caught, and they're back out. And I know of cases where we've reported where a week later they're back at it all over again. How does that happen? Okay.
So usually when a kid comes in, if they have a handgun charge or a crime against a person, or if they have if they're on probation and they have an open probation violation, those are the cases that we can hold youth on. Now, recently this past year, the legislature did pass a law where we could hold youth that are involved in car thefts, because we know that tends to be an issue, right? And we'll get into I'll tell you about the car thefts and the reason behind that later. So usually if a youth, let's say they come in on a carjacking, so as the district attorney, we need a few things. We usually need the victim to show up. So if you're talking about, regular everyday people who have to, they get notified within 24 hours or 48 hours that they have to take off of their job. Some people tend not to come. Mm-hmm. If they don't come, then as a prosecution, we can't make our case usually, because we have to have enough evidence to make probable cause at the detention.
And I want you to continue, but what % of the time do you think maybe they don't show up? Could it be up to half the time, or what would you guess?
I would say It could be up to half the time.
Okay.
Now, if we have a case where the police officer that we have could just make the case for us, then usually we can make those cases because the police are going to show up. But it's sometimes the victims that may or may not be able to come.
Okay.
If we do have a victim that is able to come, we will usually have what's called a probable cause hearing to determine if the youth, if there's enough evidence of probable cause that the youth committed this crime. Okay, so that's the first step. The second step in a detention hearing is going to be release, and that's usually where the defense attorney will put on proof of, if this youth, it's kind of like a bond hearing in adult court is what we would tend to view a release hearing as. The defense attorney will usually have a few days later, the defense attorney will have a meeting with the family, figure out what's going on with the youth, check into their school and see how it's going, and present that to a magistrate. And then the magistrate will determine whether or not we can release this youth back into the community on some sort of supervision pending their case being heard for settlement.
Will you sometimes differ with the defense attorney on whether or not someone should be held?
Oh, 100%. If a youth comes in on a handgun charge, we do not think that they should be released. We never advocate for release in those instances. A carjacking, anything serious, we never advocate, but we put on the proof that we have, and they have a right to put on their proof, and then the magistrate will decide whether or not the youth should be released in a particular instance.
So, and you object to it, you're the prosecutor,
Right.
We want to be clear, and it's not your decision to make, so it's not her point or the DA's office to decide whether this youngster is held or not. The judge or the referee or the magistrate makes that decision.
That's
so
correct.
when you feel strongly about it, in some cases you may feel more strongly about than others, but in general you say if it's a violent type case, you're always going to be advocating for them being held for a period of time.
Yes, especially if it's a handgun involved. Like, that's our number one rule. If a youth comes in on a handgun, then we're definitely advocating for them to be held in detention.
Is it frustrating for you at all at times when that doesn't happen and then you see that same youngster back in juvie court 2 weeks later?
I haven't had a lot of, now that in that particular situation, that would be frustrating but the law says that if they have an open case, so say they were released and 2 weeks later they pick up a new charge, at that point they will be held because it's kind of like adult court. They're bond on bond, basically.
Okay.
So we let you out, we gave you an opportunity to do right, now you're back. And usually in those instances, they will be held in that particular
And when you
moment.
say held, typically that means they're held until it's adjudicated? Could that
Correct.
be, what's a typical length of time to hold someone?
Usually, if we're going to, if the youth is going to go on to probation, they'll usually be held somewhere around 30 days, give or take, for good cause. We can ask for an extension. If they are going to be, if we're going to have a trial, because I may be offering a DCS custody offer, and of course, youth, they have the same rights as adults, so they may request a trial. We usually still try to do that within 30 days or so they're not sitting in detention. If it's a transfer hearing, those can tend to go a couple of months out because those are a little bit more serious, a little bit more proof that you need to have.
So from where you sit, I mean, the magistrate makes the call after the magistrate's heard from you and from the defense.
Yes.
And when the decision is made on these violent type crimes to release them to the custody of their parents, is it just the magistrate has decided there's going to be guidance there, or there's going to be a means to, obviously you don't agree with it all the time.
Right. So usually, a lot of times the youth who are first-time offenders are usually the ones that will tend to be released, from what I've seen. It depends on the facts of the case. As we talked about, aggravated assault can range from a kid throwing a rock at their mom to a young person pulling a gun on someone, right? So there's ranges within the charge. And usually, like I said, the defense attorney will put together a plan for the youth. They will present if the youth is released, are there going to be services in the home? If the youth is released, they will put a plan for supervision in the home. So when a youth is released, they're going to be put on what's called strict home detention, which means they're only allowed to go to school and remain at home. So it's kind of like a type of house arrest.
And that would have to be enforced by the parental supervision or something?
Well, we also have court probation officers who actually go check, yes.
But would you agree that there are some parents out there, some maybe well-meaning, some maybe lousy parents, and there are a lot of lousy parents, but that are afraid of their kids?
I would say that There may be some parents that are afraid of their kids. I would also say that there's some parents who are just overloaded with being single parents, and they may not have the resources to watch the youth 24 hours. And I would say that that's a large percentage of the population. It's just that the parents need help.
They're overwhelmed.
And they are very overwhelmed. They're a single parent, they have multiple children, they may have children with special needs, and trying to keep up with this one youngster can be difficult. So I think that it's the resources that the parents have that tend to cause some difficulty there.
All right, we'll take a break. When we come back, we can take some phone calls. If you have a question for the district attorney prosecuting juveniles and how it plays out, give us a call. And I have other questions. We'll get into the car theft. I know we have some statistics. We also have some gun numbers. But yeah, the curiosity today for me is just how some of these youngsters, it seems, not just in Davidson County, but I'm in Wilson County, they see a car they like. They just take it. They take it, and then they go joyriding and they dump it. It's almost like a game for them, except there are guns involved, and it's a scary thing. We'll ask her about what she observes just with the nature of these crimes. I think it's very interesting, and maybe solutions to this as well, which is no easy task. We'll be back with more right after this.